a letter of a different kind to read you. Actually, it's not a letter, it's a little snippet of an article. This is 1976, and a group of disabled Israeli war veterans were touring America. They sponsored, oh, just before we do that, in case, Michael, you need to leave, you wanted to say Kol Yisrael? In case we get caught up in discussion.
Can do. כל ישראל יש להם חלק בעולם הבא שנאמר ואמר כולם צדיקים לעולם ישוע ארץ נעשה מטעי מעשה ידי להתפאר.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so a group of disabled Israeli war veterans are touring America on a program which has been sponsored by the Israel Defense Ministry, and they came to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Brooklyn, New York. 10 large commercial vans transported their wheelchairs from the New York hotel where they're staying to the Rebbe's synagogue in 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. For several minutes, the Rebbe walked among them, shaking hands, smiling, making a bit of conversation, and then he addressed them and he apologized for his heavily accented Hebrew. And he said as follows: if a person has been deprived of a limb or a faculty, this itself indicates that God has given him special powers to overcome the limitations that this entails and to surpass the achievements of ordinary people. You're not disabled or handicapped, but you are special and unique, as you possess potentials that the rest of us do not. I therefore suggest that you should no longer be referred to as disabled, but as of now, you should be referred to as special, more apt because this more aptly describes that which is unique about you. Of course, in 1976, the benefits of such an approach had yet to be widely disseminated, and the official nomenclature for challenged people, even amongst doctors and therapists, was still couched in negative terms, disabled. But the Rebbe was applying a generations-old Hasidic dictum: think positive, and it will be positive. Indeed, the face that the Rebbe showed the men who had lost their limbs in the defense of their people was warm and cheerful and optimistic, and a number of them later said that this was the first time that their injury, since their injury, that they were met with such a natural response from another person rather than a look of pity or guilt or revulsion. But when the Rebbe returned to his room, his personal secretary saw how shattered he was by the encounter, and the secretary later reported that it was a full week before the Rebbe himself was able to recover from the experience. And what is really sort of fascinating about this letter, apart from the positiveness of it, is that sometimes, in difficult situations, we have to put in a really big, brave face. We have to be positive. You talk, things are going to be good. It's all going to be fine, everything else. And you just always put on the most positive face you can. It doesn't stop you from being human. And when you walk away, just being torn to pieces by what you've experienced and what you've seen, and by the anguish, the sight of these young men limbless, having not, with their lives still all ahead of them. Lindy and I spent a holiday in a hotel near the Kinneret, one of the Setai Hotel. I think it just opened that year, about 3 years ago. It was a lovely place, right on the other side of the Kinneret, under the Golan Heights. And it was a hotel. Most of the people there were Israelis. There weren't, can I say politely, that there weren't a lot of Americans. And there were some. It was lovely because there were people there who were Datiim, religious, and others who were clearly, not so religious or not religious at all, etc. Everybody seemed to mix together really, really well. And there was one young man who was in a wheelchair. He had lost his limbs. I'm presuming, because I never got to talk to him, but I'm presuming that he lost his limbs, in battle. And there he was, with his wife and young children. He didn't have any legs, but his little child sort of sat on his lap. And I watched them, in the dining room and the way in which they conducted themselves and sitting by the pool and everything else, getting on with his life. He seemed to be managing really, really, really well. But you couldn't help but just have an enormous sense of pity. And the very last thing you ever wanted to show to him was pity. You never wanted to look at him. You never wanted him to catch you looking at him with a glance of, oh, shame, what a shame, what a pity. He deserved his dignity. He deserved to be treated as a human being like every other human being. And that's a very hard thing for us to do. The whole concept of the disabled turning into the special, that we've changed the terminology. We no longer speak about disabled children. We speak about special children, because they are special. We have a special child in our family. She's an extraordinary child. She's got a memory that is absolutely unbelievable. She has got, capacity, talents that are just way beyond those, not just of her siblings, but all of us. But, her brain is like a slow processor. It doesn't compute quite as fast as everybody else's. So you look at it and look at a funny face, and the funny expressions which Down syndrome children have and things like that, and the funny things which they do and whatever, and their behaviors. No, disabled, you label them, instead of being able to look at every human being and to see the positive that's in them. And I think that's what the Rebbe did for these young men in this particular situation, back in 1976, which, as the article says, was a time when we just weren't seeing people in that particular light. But I wanted to share that with you because, in a sense, all of us have to face this from time to time in trying to support people who are desperately ill, with sometimes with terminal illnesses, and you want to talk to them and and you find yourself, you sound false in your own eyes. No, it's going to be okay. Like, how the hell do you know? But to be able to reach these people in a way that gives them both a sense of hope and gives them a sense of dignity, and they're not being looked at as something which is, they're not a freak. They're not a freak of nature. It's a very, very hard thing for us, but a very important one. By the way, I just want to say that we had a very small group of people last night on this program, Save a Child's Heart, these unbelievably heroic Israeli pediatric, cardiac pediatrics, pediatric cardiologists and pediatric surgeons, and about the work they were doing in Tanzania and in other countries. But I just say to you, we circulated the information about this program, and included in the information was a video, a 50-minute video about what these people do. And I want to tell you, it is one of the most moving videos I've ever watched. It really is worthwhile going back to, and just clicking on it. And I'm not suggesting you need to watch the program where I interviewed one of the founders of it, an extraordinary man called Dr. Akiva Tamin. But the video itself is really, really worthwhile. So I recommend that to you in terms of, makes yourself so proud to be a Jew, so proud. These are just wonderful people. And you see these little kids, these African kids, and the faith in everybody. The doctors are believers. The patient, the little kid, is a believer. Jesus is going to save him. He's going to be okay. It's there's a scene of them. They're brought to Israel, the father and the son. They're Christians. Before they leave, there's a church service in their little town, and the whole community comes out to pray for them. It's so beautiful. And then in Israel, they visit the church of the Sepulchre. How do you pronounce it? I'm not Christian, so I can't always get it right. Pardon?
I think it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Sepulchre, yeah, Sepulchre. you know, and you see them praying there, and it's very, very moving. You see the power of faith. You know, that's one of the things which made the movie different to others that you've seen over, you know, on similar themes. And the doctors talk about, you know, I'm in the hands of God. You know, I'm just I'm an instrument. You know, life and death has been put into my hands. You know, how do I make the decisions? Who do I decide who's going to live and who's going to die? I can't treat every child. We don't have the resources to do that. Should we take the ones who are most ill? And spend all of our resources on them, and then all the kids who had a better chance of being able to recover won't be treated? Or should we take the kids who are mild, knowing that we are putting a death sentence on the kids who are seriously ill? How do you make these terrible, terrible triage decisions? You know, and they really face this, and you see the struggle. And it's very powerful, really very, very moving. Anyway, that's my recommendation for some viewing time today. It's about 15 minutes. And you'll find it in the emails that were sent out or in the WhatsApps, etc. You'll find the details of the program.
Shlomo, just a postscript to that. We've been to film these amazing people that do these things. I just wanted to tell you that some of them who come from Iraq, for example, Kurdistan, get smuggled all the way across via Jordan and all sorts of ways, eventually to Israel. They are deeply grateful, but they have to be smuggled back to their home countries without ever saying where they've been, because they'd put themselves into danger if they were able to tell the local authorities they'd been to Israel to save themselves. Yeah. And they have to organize the return trip as well.
Yeah,
that way.
Yeah, and of course they're treating Palestinians. And last night in the interview, Dr. Tamir said, you know, look, I don't imagine that this is going to, you know, create peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It's a small bridge. He said, you know, and we've been around as Jews long enough to know that the good things that we try to do are not always repaid in kind and not always, you know, recognized. He said, you know, one is realistic about this. He said, but hey, you're making a difference to a child's life. That's what counts. And we're blind to whether they are Israeli or Palestinian or an African child from somewhere within Africa. But, you know, you look at the African countries and you just see this third world. You see the populations and you see the lack of facilities, the absence of expertise. And as you said, you know, what happens is that there's some very, very bright people who come out of those countries, but they don't stay in their countries. The brain drain is absolutely enormous. They're lured to the West and they just don't go back to their own countries and, you know, support their own people. So, you know, I read a letter a little earlier, you know, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about people who make Aliyah, and he's upset that they leave the battlefront, you know, where they properly belong. You know, very often one's duty is right where you are, you know, as tempting as it is to be somewhere else, which is why we're all here. All right, thanks for joining us today, everybody.